It's late summer 1977 on the Isle of Wight, off England's south coast. John Ackroyd is currently between jobs and is working as a deck chair attendant on the beach. Thanks to typical British summer weather, business is slow, and he finds himself reading Car and Car Conversions magazine when an article grabs his attention. An outfit calling themselves Project Thrust, headed by one Richard Noble, is looking for someone to design a Challenger for the land speed record. Ackroyd is already an accomplished engineer who has designed aircraft, hovercraft, and even the first production electric car, but he knows that designing a 650 mph record breaker represents a unique engineering challenge. Having grown up enthralled by the exploits of John Cobb and Donald Campbell, Ackroyd is certainly interested. But how credible is Project Thrust? And who exactly is Richard Noble? Richard Noble's first steps in the pursuit of the land speed record led to him building Thrust 1, a test vehicle using a second-hand chassis and an aging military surplus jet engine. Noble was lucky to escape uninjured when his jet car rolled at 140 mph in March 1977. For most people, a high-speed accident in a home-built jet car would be enough to stop them in their tracks. However, Noble was focused on the long game. He wanted to break the world land speed record. The remains of the car were sold to a scrap dealer, and £175 became the entire working budget for Thrust 2. In October 1970, Gary Gabelich had set a new land speed record of 622 mph, driving the Blue Flame, a sleek rocket car. The rules require any new mark to exceed the existing record by a minimum of 1%, which meant Noble's new car would need to average at least 629 mph through a measured mile. To reach that sort of speed, Noble would need a suitable engine, preferably a military jet with a reheat or afterburner. Running Thrust 1 at an airbase had generated some publicity for Britain's Royal Air Force, and so Noble wasted no time in making a direct approach to the RAF. He wanted a Cold War jet fighter.
And they said, well, what do you want? And I said, we need a Lightning. You are actually scrapping the Lightning, so maybe we could have one, could we? And there was a bit of a silence. And they said, what we'll do is we'll set it up on two fronts. One is you will be able to buy a Lightning engine. We'll make sure you get it available at scrap value, but the government has got to have money for it. Yeah, the second thing is, at one of the Air Force bases, we're using Lightnings, old Lightnings, as decoys. And so therefore, we'll enable you and your team to go to one of these bases and basically take all the bits and pieces you need out of the decoy Lightning. And that was fantastic. It was just a wonderful thing to happen. And so I ended up getting an engine. I had to obviously borrow money in order to do this, but we got the engine and it went into my garage at home. And, and this was great. This was a great, great step forward, And would-be sponsors would turn up and they'd see the engine. They'd think, Christ, hey, there's some real credibility here.
Thrust 1 represented less a calculated design, more an aggregation of parts, but it provided a vital starting point for the aspiring record breaker. Although he had an engine and a few ideas about the form his next car might take, Richard Noble knew that Thrust 2 would need to be designed by a professional engineer. In the 1960s, the jet cars built by Americans Craig Breedlove and Art Arfons epitomised two distinct approaches to designing a land speed Challenger around a military jet. Breedlove favoured placing the engine behind the driver, giving his Spirit of America cars a long, sleek layout that forced the driver to sit at the front of the vehicle. Art Arfons' Green Monster put the driver midway along one side of the car, next to the engine. Selecting this arrangement for his own car, Noble would later learn from Arfons himself why he had chosen this layout, and the additional advantages it had over Breedlove's approach.
Well, the shape had come about because, again, because of Art Arfons. And Art became a very good friend, amazingly capable guy. And he said, well, Richard, you see, I had this trouble. I had this fundamental trouble. I lived in Akron, Ohio, and I got to get down to Bonneville. And transportation is a hell of a problem. So I bought an old coach. And so I had to have a car which would fit inside the coach. That defined the Green Monster design with art sitting alongside. And I thought, that's really clever, because it's not about the coach, but it's about the fact that you're sitting alongside the engine. Because you're sitting alongside the engine, you've got your backside on the center of gravity, and you can feel it. You can't feel anything up the front. You're not going to feel anything. You're on the wrong end. You're a bus driver. And then secondly, that also the intake represents a huge problem with these cars. So therefore, if you've got just a simple pitot type intake at the front, that makes life easier. That's got to be good. And then, of course, the other thing is you want to get as much weight as you can forward. And with a jet engine, the front end of the jet engine with the compressors and everything else is the heavy bit. So it all fits together. That's how it should go.
Taking his cue from contemporary motorsport thinking at the time, Noble's initial sketches for the car sported 4 wheels at the front, but the remainder of Thrust 2's general layout owed much to Arfond's Green Monster. With a military jet engine in the garage and only the scrap value of Thrust 1 in the bank, Noble urgently needed to get the attention of someone to design his car.
How do you find somebody with 175 quid? Well, it's easy enough. You see, what you do is you write a press release saying we want a 650-mile-an-hour car designer. And surprise, surprise, it was run in the Telegraph, and it was also run in Cars and Car Conversions. I had this letter from John Ackroyd, and I was away for about 2 months or so. And when I came back, there was another letter from Ackroyd saying, I don't know what sort of organization this is, but I did write to you, and I got no response or anything else. So I thought, oh, I tell you what, I'm not competent to interview this guy. He sounds to me like a really good, genuine engineer. I can't make this decision. So who can? Well, Ken Norris, that's the man.
Ken Norris was one of the designers of Donald Campbell's Bluebird CN7 car and K7 hydroplane, and had become friends with Richard Noble during the development of Thrust 1.
I then rang Ken to ask Ken if he would interview John. And Ken said, it's a bit late in the day, Richard. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he's already here. So that was John all over. So that was great. I mean, there was no doubt in any of our mind that John was undoubtedly the man to do it. And I'd come up with a very primitive drawing of it with a great shark's fin on the tail and so on. John said, yeah, I think you've got it right, sort of right. And I'd like to take it on from now. So I said, you do that, please, and I'll get the money.
David Benson was the motoring editor of the Daily Express and an enthusiast for speed record breaking. A close friend of Donald Campbell, the journalist was enthusiastic about Project Thrust, and he made Richard Noble an extraordinary offer.
And he said, it's really interesting. We'd like to help you. And I said, good, we need money. He said, no, we've got a motor show at Earl's Court called the Motor Fair. It's our first time we're doing this. It's 1977. And we'd like to give you a stand. Fantastic. I said, great. Well, yes, we would very much like to do this, but how are we going to finance this? Well, that's up to you, he said, but we'll give you the space and we'll give you the exposure.
At this point, with Ackroyd's design work yet to start, Project Thrust was little more than an engine and an idea. Nevertheless, Thames Television agreed to feature the project in their coverage of the exhibition, and Noble was consequently able to sell advertising space on the stand to sponsors. Despite the stand's poor location on the first floor of Earl's Court, the combination of an imposing jet engine, the promise of a new land speed adventure, and the continuous screening of a film entitled The Fastest Man on Earth, at volumes so high that it could be heard throughout the exhibition hall, made Project Thrust irresistible to the public. By the end of the motor fair, 36,000 people had visited the stand, with 1,000 of them paying to join the supporters club. Project Thrust had well and truly arrived. However, whilst engaging the public was important, even more vital to Noble was securing industry sponsorship, and the motor fair delivered admirably on this front.
So there we are, we got the stand together. It's the opening day of the motor fair. A man called John Newell had decided that his company, which was part of Tube Investments, what he wanted to do was to find something to promote. And they wandered around, they looked at this huge stand, it's 1,000 square foot, so it was quite big. Gee whiz, this is amazing. And all these people crammed in, and the noise and the engine and all the rest. And he said, yeah, we need to really think this thing through. I just wondered, we're going to lose them. They're going to go. They're going to go and look at somebody else's stand. This is no good. We've got to hang on to them. So I said quickly, come and have some lunch. Oh, yes, how very kind. So they turned up lunch with Ken Norris. And we had a fantastic lunch. Ken did all the talking because he talked about Donald Campbell and all the stories there. And this was terrific. They all got very worked up. And they went away very happy and said, and the man, Mr. Newell, said to me, we're going to do this, he said. And then I got the bill, which was 65 quid. It's probably the equivalent of 600 quid today. And that was the last of our money. They'd eaten our working capital.
Tube Investments agreed to build the tubular frame for Thrust 2 for free, while adhesive manufacturer Loctite came on board with £5,000. As Noble did deals with sponsors and the cash started to flow, it was time for John Ackroyd to get started on Thrust 2's design. John Ackroyd had made it clear from the outset that he would design and build the car on the Isle of Wight, using local connections in aeronautics and light industry. The Thrust 2 design office was set up in the kitchen of a derelict building, without phones, faxes, or photocopiers.
All we could afford is one room. So he put the largest drawing board I've ever seen in this one room, and he got going. And of course, I was based in London, so basically I couldn't get down there very often. John on the island and my little operation in London, pushing hard somehow to keep it moving ahead. He hadn't got a phone, but there was a phone box nearby. So he saved all his coppers so he could... it was desperate, but we worked our way through it. We got through it. You know, it's just a problem and you've got to work round. In the early days, certainly, John had to get on his bike and pedal across to Britten Norman Aircraft Company there and get his drawings copied and so on. So it was desperately primitive. But that's all we could do.
From Ackroyd's pen came drawing after drawing, suspension, seats, steering, throttle linkages, fairings, fins, and fuel systems. Gradually, the now familiar outline of Thrust 2 took shape. The thing is, Thrust 2 wasn't originally intended to be the record car. Noble had anticipated it would take the British record and perhaps run up to 500 miles per hour. In so doing, it would raise the project's profile and provide a research platform for a third car, which he suggested might use the engine from a Phantom jet fighter to push the record supersonic, the approach Noble would one day take with Thrust SSC. Mindful of its role as a demonstrator, Ackroyd gave Thrust 2 a second cockpit, for use in impressing sponsors and scaring journalists. Compared with the missile-inspired profile of the current record holder, Blue Flame, Ackroyd's design was squat and brick-like. However, when tests in the wind tunnel suggested Thrust 2 might achieve 650 miles per hour and break the record, there was no reason to build a third car. Still working on a shoestring budget, Noble and Ackroyd concentrated all their efforts into building Thrust 2 into a credible challenger for the world land speed record. As 1978 rolled on, Noble continued to court sponsors, and Ackroyd oversaw the fabrication of the car's components by a growing team of engineers. Meanwhile, expert motorcycle frame builder Ken Sprayson completed the impressive tube chassis at T.I. Reynolds Works in the West Midlands. From a standing start just a year earlier, Project Thrust was rapidly gathering speed, and Thrust 2 was taking shape. In the next part of the story, Thrust 2 comes to life. Sponsors come and go, the team finally make it to Bonneville, and the project almost ends in disaster. See you next time.
And a number of people saw this. They, oh, you've got it. Yeah. Isn't that splendid? Isn't that absolutely splendid? I don't think I've ever seen this, actually. Okay, this here is the copy of Car and Carver Conversions that John Ackroyd read. That's made the whole of Thrust 2 possible. It made Thrust SSC possible. It made all these projects possible. So it's a very famous magazine, this.